established for global interests. The truth is, they are mere organizations, built on the foundation of selfish interests, with more hideous agendas for the world and her peoples. You might as well call them cults of control. They are the World Health Organization, the United Nations, and the World Economic Forum.
That's an evil trinity. The guy who was the first Director General of the WHO, which is called the World Health Organization, Dr. George Brooke Chisholm, that's his name, the first Director General of the WHO. He stated that the priority of the World Health Organization, the WHO, is population control. You think it was established for health? Well, we all thought so when we were ignorant, until we started learning some more and discovered that what their publicly stated goals are very different from their agenda.
And this was not about public health. It wasn't about controlling a money system. It wasn't anything else. This was about a bunch of sociopaths who have worked a very long time to come up with a war against humanity. You need to look at the 1952 reference very carefully. What's on that reference? Brock Chisholm, who was the Director General of the WHO, who said that the reason for the WHO's policy was going to be, first and foremost, population control. The World Health Organization's primary objective. 1952. People don't talk about Brock Chisholm. They don't go and read what he said. But it turns out that that's what he specifically said this was about. If you go back and you look at the formation of the World Health Organization, you see that it is the outgrowth of the 1913 eugenics office at Cold Spring Harbor Labs. That was, by the way, funded by Carnegie. The World Health Organization's founding executive director, was a concentration camp survivor who 5 years into the World Health Organization said the role of the World Health Organization in 1955 was for population control and population suppression.
You just heard it, that he stated that the priority of the World Health Organization, the WHO, is population control. You just heard it.
I feel it might be useful for me to point out that my participation in first the creation of the World Health Organization and my role as Assistant Director General for 24 years. I attended every meeting of the World Health Assembly and every session of the Executive Board. The Executive Board met twice a year. The Health Assembly met annually. And I was present, exercising my functions at these meetings. I didn't miss a single one.
Professor Siegel, how did Dr. Chisholm regard family planning in those early days as a potential concern for WHO?
Brock Chisholm was a realist, and he firmly believed that overpopulation was a threat, a security threat, if you will, to all the nations of the world. And steps must be taken, and it should be considered part of a health function that we do something about population control.
So you ask yourself, if that kind of a guy was the one who became the first Director General of the WHO and worked on its establishment from the beginning, so what is the WHO?
The World Health Organization is the institution granted exclusive power to guide and protect the health and wellness of humanity. The WHO is sustained by private donations the bulk of which are made by pharmaceutical and biotech corporations who have a vested financial interest in the organization's support. In 2017, the Associated Press reported that the WHO routinely spends about $200 million a year on travel expenses, more than what it spends to fight some of the biggest problems in public health, including AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. The WHO's repeated issuing of inaccurate and bad advice is not merely the result of incompetence, but rather the direct result of the Communist Party of China deliberately buying out WHO's leadership.
And what the DoD and the World Health Organization intend to do, and have gotten quite far in doing, but not completely reach their goals, is to set up the entire world as their geographic terrain, their target population as all the people in the world, the duration of their campaign as permanent, and the weapons that they're using are, number one, informational, that's the propaganda piece and the censorship piece. Number two, psychological, that's the fear and terrorism piece of telling people they need to be afraid all the time and they need to listen to the government. And then the third piece is the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons, which are called in their campaign pharmaceuticals, vaccines, but are actually toxins and pathogens.
Do you remember swine flu?
Influenza virus. Seriousness of this problem.
You were really frightened.
The numbers are staggering. Well, first of all, they are estimated by the World Health Organization to affect 2 billion people worldwide with H1N1.
Many countries, including Germany, Italy, France, and Great Britain, concluded secret agreements with pharmaceutical companies before the swine flu incident, which obliged them to purchase swine flu vaccinations, but only if the WHO issued a pandemic level 6 alert.
The world is now at the start of the 2009 influenza pandemic.
In 2010, Forbes magazine accurately reported on the WHO's fraudulent response to the swine flu. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe declared the false pandemic is one of the greatest medicine scandals of the century. By their own rules, a pandemic requires simultaneous epidemics worldwide with enormous numbers of deaths and illness. 11 weeks into the outbreak, only 144 people died worldwide, and the WHO declared a pandemic. Just 1 month before, they changed the rules. You could now have a pandemic with 0 deaths. And when questioned, they claimed the old rule never existed.
Now, there is some confusion here, and I hope to clarify. Having severe death has never been part of the WHO pandemic.
The WHO director, Dr. Margaret Chan, then went on to push left-wing politics, the redistribution of wealth for equity and social justice, and claimed that a welfare state is the savior of globalism. Over $18 billion was misallocated on this fake pandemic. In 2005, Dr. Peter Doshi published a paper entitled, "Are U.S. Flu Death Figures More PR Than Science?" drawing upon data from the CDC. The CDC bundles together influenza and pneumonia and counts them together, which is strange because according to their own data, there are far more deaths caused by pneumonia than the flu. For example, out of the 62,000 pneumonia and influenza deaths from 2001, only 18 cases were lab-confirmed influenza, 0.03%. From 1979 to 2002, there were an average of 58 influenza deaths per year.
While the WHO has a track record of spinning the wheels of fake pandemics on the world, the year 2020 was no exception, as a replication of the same old tricks by the WHO was unleashed, another fake pandemic labeled COVID-19. However, in the wake of this failed plot, this evil organization wielded yet another deceptive sinister bait, to capture the nations through the pandemic treaty also known as Pandemic Accord, to seize the sovereignty of all nations.
This is actually worse than what happened in COVID, because they don't even have a standard that says they have to isolate a pathogen, they don't have to isolate anything. What they have to do is simply say, we think that there is a reason to declare an emergency, and as such, we therefore have the ability to suspend travel, to actually penalize member states. There's a very big clause inside of the treaty that actually has penalties on member states for noncompliance. So, yes, the Tedros official statement is, oh, no, everybody still has their sovereignty. Kind of like New York had sovereignty during the pandemic. So if you feel good about how New York treated everybody during the pandemic, then you're probably safe.
They're bringing in an idea called One Health. So, and this then extends the ability of the Director General of the WHO to call a public health emergency of international concern, which incidentally is abbreviated to fake. A fake.
He is able to declare a fake if it's just a potential, actual or potential, and this is very concerning. In 2022, last year, the Director General declared a monkeypox fake, and he overruled his own emergency panel. So, it was a fake, and it was very clear that it was a fake, because there was no monkeypox pandemic. Now, can you imagine giving one individual all this power and then issuing forth a whole lot of recommendations that are legally binding?
So it is not World Health. World Health is not a plan. Who are the sponsors of the WHO? That will tell you who they are working for. So they're not working for the nations. Contrary to the face they give it.
If we look at the WHO, it is significantly funded by private interests, and the second largest funder is private of the organisation, and that funder has significant pharma investments, etc. So clearly there's a conflict of interest. You wouldn't want that entity deciding on, who should have what drug in a country. It's funded by certain countries, and it's the United States and Germany are the big ones who are very big in the drug industry. And nearly all of their funding and all the private funding is directed, which means they don't give it to the WHO so the WHO can decide what's best for the world. They give it to the WHO to do a specific task that they say. And it'll even come to, you employ these people, you'll have these meetings in these places. So it's very directed funding, and the WHO is just a tool that they're using with their funding to get something which they want.
This brings us to the second entity of the Evil Trinity, the United Nations. From its founding ideologies to its modus operandi, the United Nations stands as another suspect organization, which has hijacked the nations of the world, in the furtherance of its sinister vision. So regardless of the facade of so-called problem-solving initiatives like the Sustainable Development Goals, the establishment of the United Nations does not exist for the interest of the nations.
The UN was set up in 1945 with one simple purpose: to keep the peace. The problem is not this. The problem is that in different meetings, which I participate myself, I have seen the peace very small, like a Cinderella in a corner. And she wait to have a chance to speak, and she never had this chance. She's just waiting, she's waiting, and in fact all the discussions, they were for war. But they don't say war.
And why is that?
It was very manipulated.
Yes, everything stood on its head, right?
Exactly. And
when they say peace, they mean war.
The killing fields of Cambodia. In 1975, the revolutionary Khmer Rouge captured the capital of Cambodia and took control of the nation. In less than 4 years, this group of Cambodian communists were responsible for the death of as much as 1/3 of Cambodia's population. UN spokesmen frankly admit that the UN did nothing to stop the genocide. However, the Khmer Rouge were supported by the major communist states which often engineer terrorism and support the violent overthrow of established governments, and which from the beginning have been members in good standing at the UN. After the early massacres in Cambodia, Ieng Sary, foreign minister for the Khmer Rouge, flew to a special session of the United Nations General Assembly. After his arrival, he boasted, "We have cleansed the cities." When he appeared at the United Nations, delegates enthusiastically applauded. Similar treatment is extended to other like-minded potentates. A world effectively controlled by the United Nations directly states the key point.
It is world government we are discussing here. Inescapable.
The author, MIT professor Lincoln P. Bloomfield also explains that the UN would have to have an unchallengeable monopoly on military power.
A world effectively controlled by the United Nations is one in which world government would come about through the establishment of supranational institutions characterized by mandatory universal membership. National disarmament is a condition for effective UN control.
I've been to most of the meetings, official and unofficial, and negotiation. The world oligarchy system.
Are they the one who control?
They want to have the control. And for this reason, UN is the platform, the bridge for the oligarchy system to control.
And the oligarchs are the ones who gather once a year in Davos, the members of the World Economic Forum?
Of course, this UN platform for 2030 with Davos agenda. Majority of the countries in the world, they have no control for their own natural resources. It's exactly the system controlled by Davos particularly, with the same agenda with UN, exactly as I told you. And they control the natural resources. And people on the power, because I cannot say leaders, because it doesn't take these political leaders. People which they have the power, they are their employees. The world oligarchy system, they have the power on Europe because they control all the people like Bundeskanzler or president or prime minister or whatever there are. Because they are not the employee of their people.
They work for the other side.
Exactly.
They work for the oligarchs.
They are employees of the oligarchs.
What you're saying is that the UN is now indistinguishable from the World Economic Forum, or Davos in short, because it is being controlled by the same ideas and the same oligarchs.
Totally, 100%.
We should not be deceived by, when you're told about the United Nations holding a meeting, a general conference, or the World Health Organization holding a meeting. Don't be deceived by their Hegelian dialectical. I know that you might be. Sometimes we listen to them, and they say that they want to help solve problems. Their dialectical interlocutions have nothing to do with problem solving. They don't solve problems. They create them.
Every flu is going to be transformed in a drama drumming. So every flu, you're sick and you're going to die. And people are so afraid of death. They think that they give their life risk to people who lie to them. They believe in a government that lies to them. So they're using fear. And those who are fearful and don't change will probably, unfortunately, die. So I'm just, calling people to wake up and take back your health. Don't believe in the government. They are creating a perpetual pandemic. It's an eternal pandemic. This is the worst nightmare you can have, is to be in perpetual fear your whole life.
In bed with the United Nations and the World Health Organization is the third entity of this evil trinity, the World Economic Forum. While it brandishes a big name which deceptively suggests its global responsibility for the economies of nations, on the contrary, this organization has been responsible for the woeful destruction of the economies of several nations around the world.
World Economic Forum, WEF, you think it has to do with the economies of the nations? No, not at all. It's for Klaus Schwab. So he's using that term, World Economic Forum, a big name. But this is about kleptocracy.
In 2018, the World Economic Forum published an article on its website entitled, "How We Will Make Sri Lanka Rich by 2025. That article was removed once it became known that food prices in Sri Lanka had nearly doubled and that millions of their citizens were facing starvation.
Now, what caused this? Farmers protested and asked the government to work with them on slowly improving farming practices to be more environmentally friendly rather than implementing harsh bans. But the government was more interested in maintaining a high ESG score with its creditors like BlackRock. As a result, food production dropped drastically, with farmers expecting crop losses of 85%. The country had to begin spending money on importing food when it was previously self-sufficient. Sri Lanka is a cautionary tale. What's happening there could be a foreshadowing of what's in store for us if we don't take heed and learn some lessons.
We have to understand Klaus Schwab's delusory postulations and activism, which he carries out through the World Economic Forum. And this doesn't augur very well for the world, because these activists come in with certain agendas that got nothing to do with the welfare of nations.
So in the session we just attended here at the Economic Forum, I think there was a sense of relief, actually, in your frankness. You brought up some issues that others are reluctant to bring up.
Always. All the religious groups are against me because I'm talking about population. They want more souls. I want less on the planet.
So that's what I hope for. That we can, I mean, the planet can support something like 1 billion people, maybe 2 billion, depending on how much liberty and how much material consumption you want to have. If you want more liberty and more consumption, you have to have fewer people. And conversely, you can have more people. I mean, we could even have 8 or 9 billion probably if we have a very strong dictatorship, which is smart.
The World Health Organization and the United Nations Organization, the World Economic Forum, the trio. That's an evil trinity. And I break their influence on the nations in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Because they've done much evil in this world. Much evil. You have to understand, God has given us the authority to decide what our world will be. From now until the coming of the Lord, we decide what world we will live in. Just remember it. And you have to use what God gave you. And that's what He sent me to guide you to know by teaching you the way of truth.
The eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and His ears are open unto their cry. The face of the Lord is against them that do evil, to cut off the remembrance of them from the earth. Psalms 34 verses 15 to 16.